On today's episode of the Black Studies podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Hanna Garth, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at Princeton University. Dr. Garth was previously an Assistant Professor of Anthropology at UC San Diego. She also held a University of California President's Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of California, Irvine. She received her PhD in Anthropology at UCLA, an MPH in Global Health from Boston University, and a BA from Rice University. Dr. Garth is a food anthropologist broadly focused on how individuals and families navigate food systems in the service of their desires to eat in particular culturally inflected ways. With critical attention to the granular everyday experiences of navigating broader systems, her work links macro-scale structures to social and material impacts on life conditions. Her research asks questions like, beyond our basic needs for survival, what does it take to live a decent life and who gets to decide? Her work critically analyzes concepts like justice, interrogating how justice is understood and by whom it is defined. She interrogates concepts like food sovereignty and its possibilities in our contemporary globalized world. She is interested in how people build and maintain community and support networks within broader contexts of inequality and struggles for survival. She studies these issues in Latin America and the Caribbean and among Black and Latinx communities in the United States. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Hanna Garth, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at Princeton University. How are you doing today?
I am wonderful. Thank you. Super happy to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm a big fan of this book, so I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit more about Food Justice Undone, as well as Black Studies.
Great.
So, how did you get into doing the work of Black Studies? And what keeps you committed to doing that type of work?
Yeah. So I think that question it obviously is complicated to answer. People think of it in a lot of different ways. And to be honest, I'm not sure how many people would see me as like a member of the field of Black Studies. But because I'm very much an anthropologist, like I was an anthropology major as an undergrad. I've been an anthropologist since as long as I can remember, and a food studies scholar after that. But I have always been thinking with and through Black Studies in all of the work that I do. So like the work that went into the book, Food Justice Undone, Lessons for Building a Better Movement, just to say the whole title, builds upon years of engagement with Black Studies, both outside of and inside the academy. It also builds on engagement with Black Studies in my first book and first set of research in Cuba. That book's called Food in Cuba, The Pursuit of a Decent Meal. And so that was based on work in Eastern Cuba, a majority Black community. And I studied a lot of the literature on Blackness to understand Blackness in Latin America and the Caribbean during my doctoral program. But yeah, so I'm not formally trained in Black Studies. I didn't go to any institutions my undergraduate institution didn't have Black Studies or African American Studies. But I was always like finding ways to sort of bring it into my life. And I would say, well, first of all, I would say that like my parents definitely instilled it in me. I grew up in a majority white community in Wisconsin. And when I say majority white, I mean majority, like 99%. And so I was always sort of engaging with being in a white world and being a child and not understand how to sort of navigate difference. And my parents, especially my dad, helped me through that, basically by like constantly reminding me that I'm Black, and that that's something to be proud of. So, I grew up in an environment where like people stared at me everywhere I went. If my family went into a restaurant, like, it would get so quiet that, like, you could hear silverware clinking because people would be staring at us like that. Um, People regularly, like, use the N-word around me, like white people, um, and didn't sort of think anything of it. Um, and also had this, like, the many of the white people that I grew up around always had this exceptional narrative about me. They might say negative things about Black people, but then be like, "But you're different. You're
Mhm.
different because you grew up here, and you know, you understand us, and you don't behave in the stereotypical ways that we've decided that, quote, unquote, 'real Black people' behave in." And so I think growing up in that kind of environment, like, pursued me to understand Blackness, like, building on the kinds of things that my parents taught me, and also, like, made me kind of seek out Black people. So even if I was like, when I got to college, I was an anthropology major, and there were no Black professors in anthropology, and I don't recall there being any other Black students in at least in my class. Um, so I was like, "Okay, well, I gotta take classes with Black professors, whatever field they might be in." Um, and one of the classes that really stuck with me, was I can't remember actually the name of the course, but it was, like, ethnography. It was like
Mhm.
a sociological methods class taught by Roland Smith, who was actually the provost or associate provost or something like that. And he didn't normally teach classes, but there was, like, a critical mass of Black students that he thought would be interested in ethnography, and so he put together a class for us, and he was also the, director of the Mellon Mays program. So little did I know that his class on on ethnographic methods was really like a recruitment tool to get us
Mhm.
all into MMUF and, like, make us turn into professors. Well, it worked. He did a good job. But that course also, like, really kind of influenced the kind of anthropologist that I've become,
Mhm.
because he taught it in more of a sociological ethnography way, but it included, like, really important scholars in the field, like W.B. Du Bois, Eli Anderson, E. Franklin Frazier, William Julius Wilson, Drake and Caton, and people who are part of the anthropological canon as well, but it's just that very few anthropology programs would teach those texts as part of
Yeah.
anthropology because it's usually the focus is, like, Zora Neale Hurston. And I love Zora Neale Hurston, but it was really good to see, like, oh, there's all these different people that are using ethnographic methods, and their goal is to study Black life. And so I found that to be really inspiring and helpful. And my mentors in anthropology were also great, but they didn't specialize in the study of Black life or Black populations. So I had to kind of get it from somewhere else.
Thank you. I know that being from the Midwest racism is a very particular brand of
Mhm.
racism. So, yeah, that's
Yeah,
understood. Um, but
it's
also
special.
it is special. It's very special. I think it's really, um, interesting that, like, 1, this class that you took that was not even necessarily as connected to your major program as they had it envisioned at the university is what, like, put you on this path or allowed you to see that there are multiple different ways and lots of Black voices that can be in this anthropological discussion. And I think, like, in general, right, the vast majority of people who do work in Black studies are not necessarily trained in Black studies because 'cause there are just not that many study places to be formally trained in Black studies at the graduate level still. Um so that makes perfect sense. And I think that especially given, like, how you set up the, you talk about early on, I think in the preface of the book, like an ethical anthropology, um, and the ways in which your approach was not even with the or ethical ethnography, and then the ways in which your approach blended like home and field work because you were doing work in the field, you were doing work at home, and you were at home in the field too.
Mm.
So I actually wanted to ask you to speak a little bit more about that and maybe how that allowed you to see things that maybe a more traditional anthropological or even ethnographic approach would not have.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's been a tricky thing to kind of navigate as I wrote the book, as I've been talking about the book recently. And so part of it's like within anthropology, we obviously have a very long tradition of studying the other, the quote
Mhm.
unquote exotic other. And there's always the implicit assumption that the anthropologist is white, usually a white man. And you go out and you study usually non-white exotic others. Um, in the last couple decades, there's been a ton of anthropological work that has done other things. So it's not to say that the field really is all that, but there's still this like little kernel, little nugget in people's heads that's like that's what they expect.
Mhm.
And they also expect when you're an otherized scholar that you're going to study your community. So you wouldn't believe how many people think I'm Cuban because I did my doctoral research in Cuba. They just assume that. They're like, "Oh, she's Cuban." So many people, like people I've known for years like really they know I'm not Cuban, but they're in their brains they're like, "She studied Cuba, she's Cuban." And the same thing kind of happened with doing work in South Central, which is like so I set out to study the food justice movement. And that I didn't know who that was gonna involve studying when I started. But then I slowly realized, oh, the people that are doing this movement are mostly white people. They're mostly people who don't live in South Central or have any connection to it. And they're coming in, and the residents call them outsiders. And so I'm like, "Oh, this is fascinating." But in order to study the movement, made a commitment to study those people, the people
Mhm.
doing the work, the people doing the interventions who are not from South Central. And that has been really hard for people who've read the manuscript or listened to talks along the way. It's hard for them to understand. They're like, "But don't you wanna study, like, the struggles and the difficulty of the Black folks living in South Central?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, that is a study, but that's not the study that I have set out to do here." Um, and also, the way that I approach the work is, like so I have a loose relationship to South Central. I have extended family that live there, in-laws that live there. I during the time I lived in Los Angeles, would probably like, outside of doing this research, I'd probably go to South Central, like, I don't know, maybe every other month for a party, a baby shower, a barbecue, like, football gatherings, a lot of those.
Mhm.
Um, and so my relationship to South Central was like, it's a place of gathering and sharing food and people coming together. And that's like basically all I had ever experienced South Central as. So when I met these people who were like, there's no food in South Central. They don't have any markets in South Central. All they do is eat at fast food restaurants and they have to shop at liquor stores. I just was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, where what part of South Central are you hanging out in? Because I don't know where that part is. Um, and so I came from a framing of, like, I understand that the reality in South Central is, um, about gathering, it's about commensality, it's about sharing, and it's not about the the framework that these people have. And also, I know that, you know, Black folks have a long history of having agricultural knowledge and expertise, culinary knowledge and expertise. Black people built the foundation of American cuisine. So I don't think of Black people as a population that need someone to teach them how to cook.
Yeah. Right. Fair.
Right.
Fair.
So there there was just a lot of disconnects there. And so it's interesting because the ethical stance in anthropology is always about like respecting the community that you are working with and understanding that their knowledge paradigms are different and that we should respect their like culturally relative ways of understanding the world. So, but this is usually only applied if you're a white person studying an exotic other. But I tried to do that, to apply that to these white folks. And it's so fascinating to see how people like respond to that. Like a lot of people are like, how could you talk to those people? They're monsters. And I'm like, no, they're actually just people like you and me. Like, so I'm sort of applying the same anthropological ethics, but it's really flipped backwards. Or both backwards and sideways and upside down. And so it's hard to sort of understand who's the other, who's the outsider, what's going on here. And I'm doing that on purpose to kind of be like, our ideas about the exotic other are still backwards.
So that was definitely something that was very intriguing to me, like the fact that, no, we're gonna study the people who are coming into this community, not the community itself. Um, and the ways in which the people who are coming into the community are completely ignoring what the community is saying, in many instances and overriding the knowledge that's there already. Um, so yeah, I found that extremely fascinating as a framing because like you said, that's not the way that this is typically done. Um, so I want to ask a few more questions about the book. I'm gonna get back to Black Studies, but I just find this whole thing fascinating. um, what would you say then is like the biggest so other than the methodological shift that happens in terms of who is other or even just like the question being, okay, who is the other in this situation? What do you think the biggest takeaway from this long ethnographic research is?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a lot that I took away from the research that didn't make it in the book. So I've been conducting this research since 2008 and really wrapped it up in 2020, but still have been doing other ethnographic research in South Central since then. So even for an anthropologist, that's a very long time to be to be doing a project. And so part of what's important to say about the timeline is that the things have changed, the dynamic has changed. So it's hard to sort of say it's hard to give an overarching, like, "This is what happened, and this is what I learned from it, and this is what we should
Mhm.
do," out of it. But I would say, like, one of the big things I took away is how much deficit and lack of capacity people who are running programs and creating interventions and calling themselves experts, in particular fields have. And I'm not trying to say that that's an individual failing. I don't think that it's their fault that they lack capacity, but I think that coming through US K-12 education at predominantly white schools, going to college, majoring in whatever, getting a master's degree in whatever, you have all of that education, but most of these people were unprepared to talk about race.
Mm.
They were incapable of having discussions about whiteness. They were uncomfortable with the idea that, structural racism and years of redlining might have might have caused some problems that we should talk about. And I view that as a failing of society, in a failing of our education systems, but also, like, clearly people are not talking about these things at home, they're not reading about these things. People have not, like, exercised the muscle in their brain that allows them to integrate those things into conversations about everything, because
Mhm.
I think those things matter in every type of conversation. So people really wanted to just say, let's just focus on this one thing. Let's just, for in my case, it was like, let's just focus on healthy food. But you could apply this problem to any number of things. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, let's just focus on transportation. We don't want to think about race. We're talking about transportation. And that problem of being unable to think of, like, a complex system that is historically constituted and, more than just one dimension is very hard for people. And so that's kind of the biggest, like, problem that I saw in doing all of this research.
Yeah. I think that the point you make about it being, like, applicable to so many other things is so important because you can't talk about much in this country without talking about race and the if you really wanna talk about it seriously, because it has shaped so much of what we have today. Like, you're not talking about redlining. How can you talk about transportation or access to certain types of food or, housing, or jobs? Like, you can't not.
Right.
And not having that full picture means that everything that you're proposing is incomplete and is not gonna actually change the way that the structures are happening, which I know you point out, but, like, that's the point. "Okay, we're gonna plant a garden." What does that do about the the history of injustice that is continuing to be, perpetrated on this community?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay, so, I guess I'm curious too how your work, both as an anthropologist and as an anthropologist who focuses specifically or centers Blackness and Black communities, how does that inform your pedagogical practices? Or how do you get students, right, to not be those, uh, act activists or volunteers later?
Yeah, yeah, that is I mean, that's a great question, and I definitely have not figured out, like, the way to not produce these people, but I also think it's like, this is it's not an one individual's
Mhm.
responsibility. This is like a system-wide issue that, we need to come at from multiple entry points for sure. For me, pedagogically, when I first started teaching in graduate school, I hated teaching. And, yeah, people in grad school knew that. I told my professors in grad school, I told, like, everybody, I was like, "I hate teaching, it's terrible." Um, but I realized the reason why I hated teaching was that I was teaching in the way that I had always been taught,
Mm.
and I was also teaching the material that I had always been taught, and I didn't like it. And so I just felt like nobody told me that I had to teach things as they were taught, but I just felt like I should. Um, and that I actually had an experience where one of the first times that I taught in graduate school, I proposed to teach a course on food, and the department was like, "Great, would you like a second course? We have this course on the books called The African American Experience. Would you like to teach that?" And I was like, "Sure." Um, and that had been developed by a faculty member who ultimately left. And when I saw her syllabus, I was like, "Oh, I recognize these people. This is like W.E.B. Du Bois and Drake and Caton and Zora Neale Hurston." And I was like, "I can teach this class." Um, and I still taught it in too much of a way that wasn't me, but I
Mhm.
liked the material. And then I finally, was like, "Let me figure out how to make teaching work," because I was like, "I'm gonna have to do this, so I gotta make it work." And I realized, I was like, "Which classes do I like taking?" And I realized the classes I like taking were always studies classes, whether it's African American studies or Chicano Latino studies or food studies. And I was like, "What is it about studies that I'm drawn to?" And one of the things that I was really drawn to about the, Chicano Latino studies classes that I took was that a lot of them are heavily movement based. Like,
Mhm.
they're about the Chicano movement. Um, and so I really kind of dumbly, like, one to one, I was like, "I'm gonna create a class on the Black Lives Matter movement." Um, and that class, really changed everything for me because it made me teach extemporaneously, something would happen in the news and I'd be like, "Oh, okay. We're gonna talk about this thing that happened in the news, and whatever it is that we read this week, we're gonna apply it to this thing that happened in the news." Or I'm gonna switch us out really quick and have us read this other thing that we were gonna read later, but this happened. And that way of teaching just made me, so much more excited about teaching and a better teacher, right? So, um, the idea that one of the things that I liked about teaching that class, so that class was called #BlackLivesMatter, um, but one of the key tenets about it was the importance of other kinds of ways of knowing, of Black experiences and ways of knowing that might not be acknowledged or theorized or written down. And I wanted students to talk about, what does it feel like when you see this picture of Trayvon? Or, what do you think and feel when you see, I don't know, like a Klan rally? And now those things, those feelings, those ways of knowing are not articulated and they're very difficult to, like, put your finger on. But I loved generating classroom spaces where that was a respected form of knowledge that we could just sit and talk about, um, how we know the things that we know.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that for me really, brought it together.
thank you. It occurred to me when you were talking about how you were more drawn to or enjoyed the courses that were more studies courses, when you were taking classes. What drew you to food studies?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Um, so I didn't realize it at the time, but now, retroactively, I can create a narrative that, "Oh, I was always interested in food studies." Um, but basically, like so I both sides of my family, were agricultural people, farmers. Both sides lost their farms, but both of my grandmas gardened and canned, and um, that's basically the extent of what they did. Um, but it was a part of life. Like, it was something we talked
Yeah.
about. And then growing up in the Midwest, you even though I didn't grow up on a farm, people talk about farm related stuff all the time,
Yeah.
because it matters to the community, it matters to the people around you. And I also so I'm interested in that kind of growing and that part of food studies, but I'm also just a foodie. I love food. I love eating, I love cooking, I love baking, I love going to different restaurants. So I was drawn to food studies classes as, just something that's fun. I didn't think I was building scholarship or like building an intellectual track. Um, I was just thinking I was doing something that was fun, and it was actually those early conversations in grad school where my mentor was like, "Whatever you study, it should be something you love, and you should be really passionate about it." And then I was like, food, that's the thing. I'm passionate about food." Um, yeah, so that's kind of how it started. I also, like I have a MPH, and as part of my master's in public health, I implemented a nutrition program in the Philippines, and that experience made me kind of hone in my interest on food studies as, like, not being about nutrition, but being more about cultural understandings of what's healthy and different kinds of food ways, and how people respond to food insecurity.
Thank you. Yeah, that was something like I came into the conversation wanting to ask you that because it's just one, it's fascinating, but also it's not as like, I haven't met very many people who food studies is the thing, right? And so you have multiple books and publications about it. So I was curious as to how that happened, particularly like Black food studies that center Blackness in different contexts, which is also super interesting to have it across multiple contexts and not just focus like in the US. Which I do think that obviously there has been more information, at least in the past, I don't know, like 5 years when High and the Hog became a Netflix special. Now we could talk about food in the in the of the African diaspora in the US,
Mhm.
in different ways, so thank you. Um, I guess that kinda leads into what interests you about the past of Black studies.
Yeah. Um, so I think for me, this is like I feel weird answering this question as someone that, like, isn't fully positioned in Black studies. Um, but I think, like, basically, I'm just so grateful to all of the people and the scholars before me who insisted that the study of Black life was something that was important and mattered. Um, and I know they had a hard time because I'm still having a hard time with it. I'm
Mhm,
still getting pushback. So I know that the people who were doing this 100 years ago were really fighting against the grain. And, so whether it was like the work of maintaining archives or creating archives, recording stories, insisting that different ways of understanding the world were legitimate, and rereading things against the dominant canon, just like an insistence on seeing the beauty in different Black ways of knowing and living. I'm really just very grateful that I have a at this point, a very robust canon, Black studies canon, to draw from and to lean on. And, like, I wouldn't have been able to do the research I did in Cuba or the research I did in South Central Los Angeles without having those scholars kind of legitimize the way that I was thinking of things. Um, and also just thinking of things really expansively. So one of the things that for me, Black Studies has done is to bring in, um to allow me to think of Blackness in this very capacious international way.
mhm.
So like my first work was in Cuba and then South Central Los Angeles, and now I'm going back to do work in Puerto Rico, and I'm able to draw on all these different elements of Black studies. So now I'm increasingly drawing on Black ecologies and archipelagic thinking. I read John's latest book, and his analysis of glissant, like, really kind of opens up these ways of thinking that, the anthropological canon doesn't offer me. So yeah, I'm really grateful and happy to have all of that past to build upon.
Thank you. I think that that's That's such a common refrain, particularly from people who are trained in some of the disciplines that have been around and are taught in very particular ways for as long as they have been around, right? Being able to have Black studies as a way to see more and do more than what that discipline envisioned even for itself, because it didn't envision Black folks being in it anyway, uh, at least not as researchers, maybe
Mhm.
subject. So, and I'm gonna ask you this question in a couple ways. Um, well, one, what interests you and excites you most about the future of Black studies, or even the future of Black food studies? If you wanna
Mm.
go there instead.
Okay, I like that. Um, so yeah, I just kind of building on the answer to the last question. I think the capaciousness of Black studies is what excites me about the future and the sort of possibilities for growing the bounds of the field. Like I guess what I appreciate about Black studies is some people are very dedicated to an unboundedness and
Mhm,
a sense of abundance and not restricting what the field does and in ways that disciplines like anthropology do the opposite. You know, they're just like, this is not anthropology, this is not anthropology, this is not anthropology. And so I hope that Black studies will continue to be this kind of unbounded and capacious field that invites all kinds of different perspectives in. um I do sometimes feel like ethnographic research methods are not uh, centered in Black studies. um, so I like my selfish hope would be that there would be more space for ethnography.
mhm.
Um, Not that I don't think ethnography should like take over, but I just think that opening up to more of our methodological approaches would make me happy, at least. Um, and then for thinking about Black food studies, this is a really good question. I think it's something like I've been collaborating with Ashante Reese on projects and talking with Psyche Williams Forson about this, lots of other scholars in the field. And I think when we, like, for instance, when we published the Black Food Matters volume, the main critiques that we got were that we didn't include enough non-US, like either African on the continent or non-US diaspora. Um, and so building out what counts as Black food studies in the same kind of generous and unbounded and capacious way that I see Black studies doing, I hope would be the future of Black food studies. But I do also there's just a lot of work to still be done in Black food studies. There's not I so I'm working on an Oxford bibliography where you I have to have around 100 to 150 citations in the field of Black food studies, and I I'm at about 130, and I was like, wait a minute. Is that like I have to dig more to find more and like do all of these complex searches, be like, wait a minute, there's got to be more than 130 sources. I know there are, but like the fact that I have to look for them speaks to the problem. So
Yeah.
I think we just need more people working in Black food studies and more dynamic work on it. Um, a lot of the work in Black food studies has just been focused on like what do Black people eat? Um, I think there's a lot of other things that could be done and need to be done. So I hope future generations of scholars will turn to Black food studies.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add, talk about, elaborate on before I give you back your Thursday before our snowstorms hit?
Yeah, no, I need to get ready for that snowstorm. You're right. Um, One thing I wanna add is I also wanna give a shout out to the Heirloom Gardens Oral History Project, which is a project that I've been doing in collaboration with Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, and my co-PI at Princeton University, Tessa Lewinsky-Desmond. We have worked with Ujamaa to interview 100 plus farmers, gardeners, seed savers, and growers throughout the US Southeast and Appalachia. And we have a beautiful archive, digital archive that's housed at the Atlanta University Center and run by Spelman College, the archivist Holly Smith. And I just want to plug that because I want folks to use that archive and go to it and hear the stories and cite the stories and do research with the archive. And the people who joined us on that journey to create the archive are some of the most knowledgeable and beautiful people who are sharing their stories of how they grow things, save seeds, how they've carried African and African American traditions of growing over multiple generations. So everybody should check that out.
Well, thank you. That's amazing. Do you want to say more about that and how that project came about?
Sure. Yeah. So Ujamaa kind of approached Tessa Desmond, who's my co-PI, is like a founding member of Ujamaa. She's a farmer and professor. And they approached her and they were like, our mission is to grow culturally meaningful food and culturally meaningful seed, but we're not totally sure what everybody considers to be culturally meaningful.
Mhm.
And the fact that they even asked that question just is like, you are so much more advanced than
Yeah.
than you even know. Like, it is amazing that you knew that you needed to ask what's culturally meaningful. And so they asked us essentially to go around and interview elders and different people in their networks all over. Like they wanted us to do it in like the whole world. Um, and so them asking for that coincided with a funding opportunity at Princeton that allowed us to hire student interns and train them in doing oral history. And then we sent them out throughout the Southeast and Appalachia. We partnered with Spelman College as well, their food studies program. So we had students from Spelman, Princeton, and Tuskegee, and we sent them to various sites across the Southeast. So some of them were in rural Alabama, rural Georgia, greater Atlanta area, Asheville, um, a town called Farmville in North Carolina, Maryland, like Southern Maryland, kind of Accokeek is where the place is located. Ujamaa is located. Parts of Virginia, and yeah, our students were great, and we sent them out, and they conducted these interviews, and they also helped all of the participants in their gardens and helped them on their farms. And for a lot of people, that was like one of the most meaningful parts of the experience was either doing the labor of helping on the farm or having the help on your farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Everybody needs to go check out that archive.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. And I think that that's and you mentioned earlier that when you took over the like Black culture class or African American culture class, that's when you realized that you could teach more things that you were interested in teaching. And I think that like this archive would be a really good addition to our Black culture class. Um, so
Yeah.
I'm going to integrate it next time I teach the course. So thank you for mentioning it.
Yes, you are very welcome. Let me know how it goes.
I will, for sure. Thank you so, so much for your time and your book and for being here today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you stay warm and snow does not happen at the expected levels for either of us.
Thank you. Yes, I hope all of those things for you as well. But I also hope you have a good shovel and some good boots because I think something's coming.
Yeah. Luckily, I don't have to shovel. but I plan to, if it comes, I just plan to be in my house until it's gone. So
That's the way to go.
have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.